Well, welcome everybody. This is I don't even know what episode this is. Like somewhere around 30, 31. But today we have a very special guest, like somebody that we had. Like I personally felt that I had a lot of parallels between Dave Manheim from the Adobe podcast. Thanks for coming on today,
My
man.
pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, man. I knew that we were going to come here because I heard another interview with somebody. And then I was like, I told Ben, I was like, I think we're going to somebody's apartment, which is fine because I told you that I like to come out to people's, keep them comfortable and, don't make them travel too much because I appreciate your time. I know you got a lot going on. So, but yeah, man. So, thank you. Like we were just talking before, like right before we started recording that, you and I, both being in recovery, I like talking to, obviously I love talking to all guests, but like when there is a sick and suffering person on, that I have something in common with, it makes it all the better. And, we're both, in the service industry, and in recovery. So I just wanted to bring you on today and talk to you a little bit about your experience because here on Longshots, it's about people like overcoming that adversity, living in their passion, and you getting clean and starting a podcast. One, that's obviously what we're trying to do here, and two, revamping your life after the carnage and the suffering that
Totally.
you've been through. It's just really, for me, it's just absolutely nothing short of remarkable. So
Thanks.
And I love your content. Your show's great, man.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Like you almost sometimes I take like I'm very very invested in my recovery. You know what I
Right.
mean? I take
Right.
it really seriously. I participate in my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I and I talk about all the dumb shit I did over and over and over again.
Right.
But sometimes I'm still disconnected. Like that, it's the same life. It's crazy,
Right.
And so like I appreciate that preamble, and I appreciate like your point, and like, dude, I started Dopey when I had 4 months clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
With my friend Chris, who had almost 2 years clean,
Right.
and I never had got. I mean, I think I had gotten 10 months together before that, and now I have like 7.5 years. And I never
Yes.
stopped recovery, and I never stopped Dopey. So it's interesting, You know what I mean?
So, but you doing the podcast, because like I've shared on this show before that like that was something that was never on my radar. I mean, and you had been in the media world before like was that like were you using it at that point or?
I always wanted to have a talk show.
Okay.
Like that was my dream. And then we're in my dad's house. This is the apartment I grew up
Right.
in. And I remember when I was a little kid, I would get up in the room next door, right
Mm-hmm.
there,
Mm-hmm.
and I would come into the kitchen, and my mom would be in the kitchen, and there was a clock radio on the fridge, and she would listen to this old radio show called Rambling with Gambling. It was like a 10-10 wins fucking
Okay.
old people talk show.
Right.
And I would listen to it, and I would be like, this guy is so relaxed. I know I could hear that he loved sitting there
Right.
talking to people.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's interesting to me. And then I would hear, what if I stayed home from school sick, I would watch Regis Philbin.
Oh, of course,
And
yeah.
I fucking
Yeah.
was like, this guy has the job I want.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then it was Howard Stern.
Oh yeah.
like-
absolutely.
But when I was in high school, I went to this kind of great high school, and when you after your 11th grade, your senior year, you get an internship.
Oh,
And I
shit.
got an internship at MTV, and I wound up like just pursuing to get on MTV when I was at MTV, and I did.
Mhm.
And me and my best friend were interns at MTV, and we would like wander the hallways, and we met Kurt Loder. We'd hang out with Kurt Loder,
Sick.
and like we got on MTV, and I was like, this is what I've always wanted to do.
Right.
And then I went to college and became a horrible stoner,
Mhm.
and just religious stoner. And then I was doing weird promotions. Like I worked as like I worked in promotions. We would like
Right.
give out gum on the street,
Yeah.
or we would bring like cigarette promotions to the Jersey
Right.
Shore.
Wow.
And that was my
yeah,
job.
Yeah.
And then I had a friend who was a PA, a production assistant for MTV Unplugged, and he sprained his ankle,
Oh, wow.
and he had another gig, and he was like, I have this gig at this place called Burly Bear do you want to do the gig? And I was like, yeah. And I showed up there, and I just hit it off with the guys. I remember the first day I was there, the guy was like, you look like you've done a lot of drugs. I'm telling you, I did more. And he was like,
there's always somebody that says
and I
that.
was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then I wound up working there, and I became a horrible drug addict there, but I also
Right.
got to like produce a show about music and interview
Very
a ton
cool.
of people and be on air, and I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved
and
it.
that's where it was just like, like, because as fucked up as I would get, there was always like this, whatever this is, like, that's driving me was always there. Like, I remember just like talking to people, like wanting to be in some sort of like professional atmosphere. Like, even when I was like, like, I remember picking up one day, and then the guy, like my buddy, was like, well, what are you doing today? I was like, I have an interview for an agency. He's like, what? Like,
No,
you know
but
what I
that's
mean?
like, it's like a weird motor.
It was always going,
Mine was going too. It just when my addiction became just ridiculously,
Yeah, all that.
crippling.
Yes.
Then I became like, it was such an embarrassment. And
For sure.
and for me, I always wanted to do production, but then like I became a heroin addict and a methadone addict, and
Yeah.
and I literally did not work for 9 years or something crazy, crazy amount of time. And I had a girlfriend.
Were you on the street?
No,
No.
it was not. I always say if I didn't have cable, I don't think I would have stayed on heroin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear you.
I don't think I would have pulled it off on
Right,
the street. I don't
right,
think I would
yeah.
have had a chance. But I had a girlfriend who I lived with, and she provided for us, and I lived with her, and I lived with her here, and then I lived with her in Los Angeles, and I always describe it as she had 2 cats, and then me. I was like the third cat on methadone in the house.
Yes, I totally hear you, because I think we all have that scenario. Well, a lot of us have that scenario where we have a significant other that we just kind of like take hostage, and those poor people
Horrible.
have to endure our lifestyle and everything that comes with that, and it's just really a horrible thing. But yeah, like, to get back to what you were saying, like, it was always there, but then like at one point it was just like such a distant memory that like it was something that I had to almost I really had a hard time of just being like, I'm just gonna be this fucking drunken junkie for the rest of my life, you know what I mean? And and I think really was like, you get to that fork in the road. It's like, either I'm gonna go this way, or I'm gonna fucking start to do something, to make my life a little bit better. Was there a moment that you can pick out that we were like, I gotta get back to that life?
Well, okay. I mean, like, to be honest about it, like, I always wanted to be in that life. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I had this job producing a TV show at Burley Bear, and Burley Bear was a subsidiary of Broadway Video, which is Lorne Michaels' company.
Right.
So I was like, it's gonna happen, and then like, I remember it like it was. I mean, I became such a heroin addict at that
Right.
job that I was making more money than I ever made, and I was living in low-income housing, but I still couldn't afford my habit at all.
Right.
And I wound up having the choice of either telling work or telling my parents that I had to go to detox.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake of telling my parents, and because work would have sent me to treatment.
Yeah.
And instead I was in breach of contract, and they fired me. And I went to rehab, and then I got a job at MTV2. And I was producing a show at MTV2. It was called Handpicked Volume 2. And I was the producer, and Jason Schwartzman was
Right.
the host of the show.
Okay.
So I'm directing Jason Schwartzman, and I'm fucking wasted. I got to the shoot an hour late because it was like daylight savings, and I didn't know it. I also had gotten hit in the face with a chair the week that we were making the show, like actually shooting it. So I had like my nose is crooked now.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Damn.
I had a black eye, my nose is all fucked up, and I'm directing Jason Schwartzman.
Right.
It was fucked. I mean, that job was like, for me, like junkie paradise, because I'm like in the MTV building, like I have an office, I'm the producer, I was making a bunch of money and I'm spending it all on heroin, and I'm shooting up in the office overlooking Central Park South, feeling like I'm the man. I remember like sitting in, I can visualize sitting in their toilet shooting up, and like and I got the job ended. It was horrible. I did a horrible job. The show was horrible. I was a horrible director. Everything about it was horrible.
That's
and it
great.
was funny because like the acts on that show was like John Mayer was one of the new artists featured on my handpicked volume 2.
Right.
Nora Jones was on it. Like some really fucking famous big people. And
Right.
Jason Schwartzman was the host. I remember the show ended. It was horrible. They aired it because they kind of had to.
Sure.
And the guy was like, "We're not having you back." And the guy who hired me was a guy I had worked with in high school. This guy, Alex Coletti. Shout out to Alex Coletti. He's
What
a
up,
genius.
Yeah.
He created MTV Unplugged.
Oh,
He's like a genius. And and I fucked him over. And I really fucked myself over. I never talked to him again.
Damn.
And he said, "We can't have you back." So what did I do? This was it was the late 90s, or maybe the early 2000s, maybe 2001. I got 2 shopping bags, and all MTV is free CDs. Every desk is like a pile of CDs like this.
Yeah.
I got 2 shopping bags. I took every CD. I stole every CD at MTV that I could find, and I went down to 8th Street and I sold them all. And then I went on unemployment. And then I went to Florida to try to get better, and I couldn't. And then I went to California thinking I'm a big shot producer and I'm gonna make it work.
Right.
And I go to California and I get a job producing at some fucked up channel in California, Channel 9. It's like not a real channel. And I was working on a show called 9 on the Town, which is like one of these magazine shows. And I was a fucking train wreck. I was such a train wreck that they had a bathroom off of the production room, and there's like a dresser, and in the middle drawer of the dresser I had a tissue box in there full of needles and comic books. And when I went to the bathroom, I would shoot up in that bathroom. And I was like, I thought, you ever see Permanent Midnight? It's the greatest junkie memoir. It's a memoir by this guy, Jerry Stahl, but he wrote for a bunch of really famous shows. He wrote for like Moonlighting and Alf and a bunch of really famous shows.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know. Yeah, I know that the creator of Alf was like super fucked up. Yeah.
Yeah, it was this guy.
Yeah.
And he's a genius. And I imagined I was him, but I was the lowest budget, fucking off-brand, not good version. I got fired from that job really soon after, and I didn't get another job for 10 years.
Damn.
Right? Methadone, heroin, benzos, and weed.
Yeah.
That was my life.
Yeah.
And so the question was, how did I ever get it together? Long answer. My mother was dying from leukemia, and she called me, and I was living in LA in that train wreck of a life, and she said, "I'm going to die." And I just didn't want her to die with me getting high in California. Like, that just seemed like it was like one of the only moments in my life where I was like, I got to do something.
Right.
And I was on 150 milligrams of methadone.
Damn. I was only on 80.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Damn.
And
Were you that guy that came in and was like, "Oh, I still feel it.
Yeah,
Give me more."
Well, I was that guy. I was also the guy that
Yeah.
would get high. I would buy dope before I would get to the methadone clinic,
Yeah.
and I would buy pills at the methadone clinic. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I was fucked up. Like
Yeah.
I was really
Yeah,
in
yeah.
bad shape.
Totally.
But when I heard that news from my mother, I detoxed methadone. It took me like a year,
Yeah.
and then I
I
didn't.
did that shit cold turkey. It was
You
fucking
did?
miserable. Yeah, it was miserable. Most miserable. Like the most.
80 just to nothing and nothing.
I went cold turkey. Yeah, I was they had weaned me to 65, and then what happened was, real quick, is that I was fucking drinking out of control, like around the clock. Like at this point, I was physically addicted to drinking, and I had got fired from my job the night before, and I went home and I drank till like 3 a.m. I woke up, because I always would go to the clinic early in the morning to beat the line, right? So I get up there.
In Jersey?
Yeah, in Jersey, and I'm like my mom is driving me because I'm not like I
Oh,
don't
that's
have
the
my
worst.
car
My
has
mom's
been.
driving to the methadone.
I'm 33 years old.
It's rough.
Yeah,
That's rough.
like my car has been repoed. I have no fucking. I have no room with any of my family. Like what I mean? I'm living
You're
on
done.
my mother's. I'm done. So she's driving me to the methadone clinic, and I knew. they would pull me out of line and give me sobriety tests, and I wouldn't get methadone that day. You know what I mean?
See, that's not what they did at my clinic. What they do at my clinic is that if you tested dirty, they raise your dose. That's how I got to 150.
Oh shit!
They just raise you because they think they need to block it.
Oh
You know?
wow!
So-
Wow, that did not happen. Well, because I was like drinking, or I don't know, whatever. But anyway, so like I was just like, you know what? And this is like where we were talking about before, like those moments in which like you think that a higher power, God, the universe, whatever, intervenes, but in that moment, you know, I thought it was all me, but looking back on it, you know, it was definitely that moment. I was just like, just take me home. I can't do this anymore. So I went home and I kicked, and of course, it wasn't like the last bout of insanity for me, but it was certainly a step in the right direction. And it was like, yeah, I had gotten off methadone, and that's how I did it. I did it cold turkey, and it was
That's crazy.
Fucking
No
painful.
pills, no weed,
Nothing.
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 No alcohol.
Well, I would, yeah. So like I couldn't sleep, dude. I was in an incredible amount of pain. I couldn't sleep at all, and I would do like a shot every once in a while. But what happened was
A shot of liquor.
Yeah.
You would drink
But
it.
I would drink. Yeah, I would drink it. You know, but like I was physically addicted to alcohol at this point too. So like I had to drink or I would seize, because I had been in the hospital like 2 weeks before that, and because I stopped drinking, and I went into seizure, and like, so I had to like I knew at that point like I had to continue to like, because as soon as I got back and they cleaned me out of the hospital, they were still giving me my dose in the hospital. They called the clinic that got my dose while I was in the hospital, but as soon as I got home, you know, I still continued to drink, and like, you know, it was just like this cycle all over again. So yeah, but for the most part, it was like just this insane pain that I'll never
I can't
forget.
imagine. Like I never had to come off that much. I mean, I've kicked. Every time I kicked, I couldn't handle kicking cold turkey, and I couldn't. I if I made it a day, it was a miracle, and I always used, and I always had to go away. I was so scared of full on withdrawal, you know, and with
It's fucking dangerous.
well, I never was physically addicted to alcohol. So
Yeah.
like you can't die from heroin
Right,
withdrawal
but-
or methadone
Yeah,
withdrawal.
I know.
Alcohol withdrawal will kill you.
Yes.
And I
You
had
get a stroke. Yeah.
I had 10, 12 seizures from benzo withdrawal. Crazy seizures.
Yeah.
Like horrible
I know.
seizures.
It's only alcohol and benzos that you.
Yeah, the benzos could have killed me, and
Yep.
I wasn't really aware of it.
Yeah.
But I wound up getting off the methadone, and I came home. You know, me and that girlfriend moved to Vermont, and I was still smoking a ton of weed because I didn't want to be sober at all.
Yeah.
You know, I just
No, I get it,
I
yeah.
just I wanted to, and I just didn't want to deal with dope. I didn't want to deal with
Yeah.
methadone,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to deal with seizures. I had so many seizures.
I know.
So-
Scary
yeah,
shit.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm just gonna, and I love smoking weed. So I was like, I'm just gonna smoke
Weed
weed.
turned on me at
Uh,
one point.
Weed never turned on me,
Yeah.
but I turned on it by becoming a full-on drug addict. So that's the how did
Oh,
weed turn on
I
you?
guess it just I couldn't take, like, I knew I would smoke weed, and the voices in my head would get so loud, and they would just completely just like tell me the piece of shit that I was,
Right.
and I couldn't escape it, and it would just
See, that's sad. I mean, that's sad to me, and it's also like it's how it goes. You know, I wound up getting off of heroin and pills and everything, but living for weed until I stopped smoking weed like 7.5 years ago.
Wow.
But I loved it right up to the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The weed. I still feel high now.
What's your sober date?
I've claimed August 13th, but it was somewhere in there.
Yeah.
2015.
Nice. Good.
What's yours?
December 10th, 2015.
So I'm much more sober than you.
Yeah.
So it's really terrific
Yeah.
for me. But I came back. I didn't get sober. My mom died. I wound up stealing her Percocets after she was dead.
Of course.
But it didn't go to a full relapse. And then I met this woman who I had met when I was using, really beautiful woman, and we started dating, and she got pregnant. You know, and then for some reason, maybe because of crazy pressure or whatever, I relapsed in the pregnancy on heroin, and it was really bad.
Yeah.
You know, on pills and heroin, and it was really bad, and we had the baby, and I was using, and she didn't know, and she found out, and she left, and that's when my addiction really ballooned. You know what I mean? Like, I was also like managing Katz's Deli, and I was like I would count the monies on Sundays. Like, I was like counting a lot of money,
Yeah.
and I'm just fucking falling out into the pile of money. And
Yeah.
it was like very cinematic, but
Yeah,
it was fucking,
right.
But I got fired
Mhm.
because I was also waiting tables and nodding out at the table.
Yep.
You know, eating food off my customers' tables.
Yeah.
Like, that's a good look. Right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a great. That's
yeah.
a great look for a restaurant.
Yeah.
And I had to go to treatment then, and I went to treatment, and that was the end of. I mean, I did heroin one more time, but that was like, and I had this baby. You know what I mean? I had this little girl. She was, I think she was, when I went to treatment, she was like 13 months or something. No, maybe she was just 6 months when I went to treatment. But I didn't get sober in treatment. You know what I mean? I got a minute, and then I relapsed, and then it was like I wasn't allowed to see her if I didn't show 12 months of continuous sobriety with a DNA test, with a hair test.
Hair follicle, yeah.
And I still couldn't. It took me a little while, and then I was like, "Fuck it, I need to do this." Because your mom would drive you to the methadone clinic. My dad drove me to see my kid,
Right.
and it was probably a similar
The feeling of shame, yes.
But I had a child,
Yeah.
and like, oh man, it was, and my dad was such a good dad, and like, it was bad.
Yeah.
It's just
I got
like
great
it was.
parents,
It was as
yeah.
bad as you can imagine, and I managed to cobble together 12 months without. I drank a few times, but I didn't smoke weed or do drugs, so I had clean DNA. But I wasn't sober. You know what I mean?
Right.
I wasn't drinking, but I didn't have a program, and I didn't have a way of life. And then after I passed the hair test and I started to get custody of my daughter overnights in my apartment, I started smoking weed again. And I smoked weed, you know, for a while, for another couple of years. And then I tried to put it back together. And then I started doing pills here and there.
Right.
And then I did dope that last time. And then I tried to put it back together with my daughter's mother, and she found out that I was using. And she was just like, it's not happening. You know what I mean? Like, and that's when I found myself. That's when I had a spiritual awakening. That's when I had my Bill W moment.
Yeah.
And I was in the kitchen of my apartment, and I'm fucking writing an email to my daughter's mother, begging her to let me smoke weed. That I can be a good father. I can handle this if you just give me permission to smoke weed.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, I was like, I gotta try something else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And then, so like, how long after that do you meet Chris and launch?
Oh,
Dopey?
that's an interesting question. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
That's
so much.
good. That's okay.
I'm not usually such a rambler.
Well, that's all right, dude. This is what we're you know.
I met Chris when I went to that treatment.
Okay.
When in 2011, I met Chris, and I get to this place called Mountainside in Canaan, Connecticut, and he had probably been there like 3 months, and it was a 28-day program. He was just like fucking living there.
Yeah.
And we hit it off, and like we made each other laugh, and he stayed on for another 3 months. He like did an outpatient program there.
Right.
He lived there, and I went back to my apartment and back to waiting tables at Katz's. Lost the manager job. They said, you can wait tables, you're never going to manage the store again. I said, okay. And every once in a while Chris would want to impress his girlfriend, and he'd want to impress me. So he'd bring his girlfriend to Katz's.
Right.
You know, and then we were in touch, and then it's like the production thing, right? Like, I still had the dream, and I was like, Katz's is famous. I should do something with Katz's.
Totally.
And the guys that work at Katz's are like funny motherfuckers. You know, they're all Dominican, and they're really funny, and they fuck with you. You know what I mean?
Right,
And I was like, I want to do a show about them, and we're gonna call it Behind the Counter.
Cool.
And we started shooting with them, and they sucked. You know, like they froze up.
They call it clammed up.
They wouldn't do it. Because
yeah.
they. But then I was like, how do I get them to be themselves? So I had a friend, and he was like, you have to be in it. And I was like, okay. So it went from behind the counter to the last Jewish waiter. And, and the last Jewish waiter was, it was like my favorite, until Dopey, the last Jewish waiter was my favorite thing I ever was a part of.
Nice.
Because what it was the idea, it was this weird talk show. So I had a talk show that I'd always wanted.
Right.
And the talk show was about this waiter who hates waiting tables.
Mm-hmm.
So he does a talk show while he waits tables.
Right.
At Katz's.
Nice.
And that's what we did.
That's cool.
It was, but I was smoking weed.
Uh-huh.
So like I didn't have a program.
Yeah.
You know, and like we did 3 episodes and it got a bunch of press. Like
Mhm.
New York Magazine covered it, Paper Magazine covered it, Huffington
Oh, cool.
Post, USA
Cool.
Today. Like it was in all these places. And Chris was like, dude, I want to do something like that. And I was
Mhm.
smoking
Mhm.
and it was, and I was like, well, I was like, what can you do? And he
Mhm.
was like, and Chris was very creative. He
Right.
would write, but I was making fun of him. I was like, you can't do anything.
Right.
And meanwhile, I'm using,
Mm-hmm.
and then my daughter's mother finds out, and I had that bottom, and I start calling Chris,
Mhm.
and I'm like, man, I was so obsessed with getting my family back, and I was pretty obsessed with getting high, and he had a year and a half, and Chris was the worst addict I had ever met,
Mm-hmm.
and he was working a program of recovery, and I was like,
Mhm.
what do you do?
Right.
And it annoyed him. And then he's like, what I really want to do is something creative. He's like, that last Jewish waiter thing was so cool.
Yeah.
What can we do? And then I remembered I had this other friend when I was using, and he's like, he's like, we should do a podcast about drug stories. I was like, what's a podcast? I was like,
Right.
I don't know what that is. And I was
Yeah,
high.
yeah.
And he made a podcast about drug stories, and he sent it to me, and it was like the Artie Lang pig story.
Right.
And he like found some famous drug stories,
Right.
and then he put them together and he sent it to me, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was high. I didn't think about it again. But when Chris said, what can I do? That idea flashed in my head, and I stole my friend's idea.
Mhm.
And I was like, dude, why don't we just do a podcast? It wasn't going to be famous people drug stories. It was going to be our drug stories.
Right. Right.
And I was like, why don't we do a podcast about drug stories? And he goes, what's a podcast? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, what do we do? And I was like, listen, I just knew what to do.
Mhm.
I don't know why I knew what to
Yeah.
do, but I listened to the Howard Stern show literally every day
Yeah.
for 20 years,
Mhm.
literally for 4 hours a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I know what to do.
Yeah.
All we have, it's like, just come to my apartment and I'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I refused to do though was buy equipment.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I was like, we're not buying fucking equipment. Because we were the kind of people, if we buy skiing equipment, we're never going to go skiing.
Right. Right. Right.
You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was
yeah.
like, so we had a laptop. We talked into the laptop, right? He came over. He's like, what do we do? I was like, you tell 2 drug stories. I'll tell 2 drug stories, and I'll make fun of you, and we'll talk about what we're doing tonight, whatever.
Right.
And we recorded 4 shows the first night, and we didn't stop. You know what I mean? And we made an agreement that we agreed, like you and I were talking about, the only way to do anything is to never stop. And both of us were fucking obsessive, crazy addicts.
Yeah. Right.
So like we were like, we're gonna do this and we're not gonna stop, and we didn't. And fucking Chris lived in Great Barrington, Massachusetts.
Okay.
He drove to New York once a month, and we recorded 4 episodes every
Sure.
time. And the show kind of grew. We got a little culty following,
Yeah.
and we'd get kind of like we get lucky and get weird famous people like the rap group House of Pain.
Yeah.
So like Danny Boy O'Connor was a Cats guy. He was a Cats' regular. I waited
Okay.
on him all the time, and I didn't know anything about his story.
For sure.
And he came into Katz's one day, and it's that day we were recording. It was that day of the month.
Nice.
I was like, dude, would you come and do my podcast after lunch? And he's like, yeah, I'll do it. And I just figured he was on tour with Cypress Hill and had a bunch of weed stories.
Right.
But it turned out he had 12 years of sobriety, and he was like a fucked up tweaker who was homeless. Like, and
Damn.
he had a serious recovery story.
That's awesome.
And then like we got like this guy
That's great.
Nick Reiner, who's Rob Reiner's son. He came through a couple times, and we got Bob Forrest from this band Thelonious Monster, and also in Celebrity Rehab. He was like one of the techs on Celebrity Rehab.
Okay.
And then we got Dr. Drew.
Dr. Drew, yeah.
And
is that how you got Dr. Drew through him?
no, it was funny. We got Dr. Drew because I'm a freak. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that the podcast ratings mean anything or whatever.
Right.
But Chris was really interested in how to get on the podcast ratings, and he was like, if we get enough reviews and we do this, then we get this. And
right.
He was having all of his friends write reviews, so we started getting on the podcast charts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and we were on the comedy podcast charts.
Right.
And then we're talking about, we're never gonna fucking compete with Joe Rogan.
Right.
And I was like, what if we make it a self-help show? And we thought that was the funniest thing in the world. Like the idea that it would be a self-help show, but in reality, it was a self-help show.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, tons of people.
It's just
that
like
are in recovery. Listen, yeah.
But it was like such a funny joke to us. And then it got to Dr. Drew. I was like, fuck you, Dr. Drew. and he liked it or something.
Oh, shit.
And then it turned out that Chris had been treated by Dr. Drew years before.
Damn.
And I wrote, as soon as he liked it, I wrote him and his wife. And I was like, how do we do a podcast? And they invited us to their home. And I ran out and bought equipment. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't go to Dr. Drew's house.
You can't go there with the laptop. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
So me and Chris went to Dr. Drew's, and the show grew. And the whole time I'm like fucking stalking Artie Lang. Like I was gonna do a separate show called Stalking Artie Lang. And eventually we got Artie. I mean, we got a bunch of other people along the way, but mostly the first 142 episodes was me and Chris just fucking being stupid and having fun.
Cool.
And then the audience participated, and we started, like I would say, Stay Strong, Dopey Nation as a joke, like a preacher kind of thing.
Right.
Stay strong, Dopey Nation. Like bullshit, whatever. Like.
Right.
And all we wanted Dopey to be was fun.
Right.
And all we didn't want it to be was bullshit. We didn't want to have like the Experience, Strength, and Hope podcast.
Right. Yeah.
We didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because I also hated 12-step when I started Dopey.
Everybody. I mean, you were right there, right, in the beginning of your recovery, right? I mean, I fucking hated
meetings.
The first year of my recovery, I hated it so much. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we made fun of it. I made fun of it all the time.
Sure.
But at the same time, I was committed to it.
There was no other way.
I was totally committed to it, and I had heard that rarely have we seen someone thoroughly follow this path and not achieve these results. And then show grew, and the audience participated. They're sending in emails, we're reading stories, they're sending in voicemails, we're playing them. The Dopey Nation exists. Somebody got a tattoo. You know what I mean? Like
I heard that story on.
Well, that was a different one.
Okay.
Yeah, that was this woman who we paid for her to get a Dopey tattoo. And then people started getting them. There's like 30 Dopey tattoos out there.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
I don't have any tattoos, but still, it's cool.
Right.
It's cool.
Yeah.
I get a Dopey tattoo if you're thinking about it. But I'll pay for it. But then like my best friend with this other kid named Todd, who was a crazy deadhead, he wound up coming on the show a bunch of times, and he wound up dying, randomly. He was the one person, we had a rule nobody could come on if they were using, except Todd, but then Todd died, and literally fucking 5 weeks later, Chris died.
Oh, dude, that's horrible.
And I had no idea he was using.
You didn't know Chris was using?
No idea. No idea. I didn't even believe it when they told me he was dead.
That's terrible. I just lost one of my good buddies too in November. The worst kind of way, dude. Like he OD'd in rehab. Like he
died in rehab?
He snuck some shit in.
Horrible.
OD'd and died in there. And it's just been like, it was just, I got like, I was listening to your show earlier today, and I got like super emotional because he was just like such a light dude, such a good guy, you know what I mean? And it sucks, it sucks. And yeah.
I mean, but the weird thing is, like, I had a temporary sponsor at the time who was like, he's like, you got to step over the dead bodies, and I was like, fuck you, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, bro, it
was rough.
Yeah.
But the thing that happened was after Chris died, the dope people in the fan group started the Dopey Nation Facebook group, and now there's 8,000 people in the fan group.
Damn.
And it's really because of it's like, it's a very dark idea, but like when a body goes into the ground, the body feeds the ground. The flowers bloom from the
Sure.
death because it feeds the earth. And I think I mean, Chris's death was the worst thing ever, and I would trade all of the dopey success in a second for Chris to not be dead.
Mhm.
But his death helped a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people got sober because I've heard so many stories of people that got sober because they
Yeah.
heard what happened to him.
It's great.
So I mean, it's awful, but it's like there's got.
Well, I mean, like that's like the like when people say like, oh, why did it
why him?
why him and not not me or not you, and it's just like that's an unfortunate part of the game that we play.
100%.
So all right, so great. So like Dopey starts taking off. Unfortunately, Chris passes. Like you're faced with the real true. Like another fork in the road, right? You're like, what am I gonna like? Am I gonna really do this thing, or am I just gonna, kind of let it die with Chris? What was the factor that made you to keep going? Was it an honor? Like you're like, I have to keep honoring his life to do it.
No. I mean, the first answer is, like I said, when I was a little kid, I wanted to have a talk show.
Yep.
And now I had one. And this is all I had wanted.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
had it, and I wasn't going to give that up, number one.
Right.
Number two, we had an audience of people that liked the show. And like, I wasn't going to, and they relied on the show.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to give that up. And my wife kind of wanted me to give all of it up because she knew how obsessed I was with
Right.
Dopey.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I wound up getting back together with her, and we had another kid, and
That's
we
great.
bought a house. Like
Right.
we bought a house and had our second daughter just before Todd died, like weeks before Todd died.
Mhm.
So that summer we had the second baby, fucking bought the house. Todd dies, Chris dies, all in the same summer.
Right.
And I didn't want to stop doing the show. But I said to her and I said to myself, I said, if the show sucks or it's not fun, I'm going to stop doing it.
Right.
And it kind of sucked for a while,
Yeah.
and it wasn't fun for a little while.
Yeah.
But it got better.
Yeah.
And
Well, you were like mourning. Yeah, I'm sure.
yeah, it was also like, how do we find the voice of the show? And how do we make it fun? And how do we make it not suck? And I had a
Right.
friend who came in and he helped me make the show better and stuff.
Mhm.
But that was, I mean, Chris died, I mean, it's going to be 5 years, I think, this summer. So I've been doing it without him forever now. And I still really love doing it. And my life is different and better, and the show, thank God, does honor Chris. Like we mention him every episode. I like the Twitter account says Dave and Chris.
Yeah.
The Instagram account says
I
Dave
didn't
and
know
Chris.
that Chris wasn't until I started to listen. I was like, "Oh, Chris passed." Yeah, I think that's great that you keep his. spirit
Yeah,
alive.
I don't know, like, because it's like fucked up. It's like almost a test. Like if someone reaches out to me and they're like, "Hey, Dave and Chris," I know they don't know what the show is doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I also think that like it's the whole like spirit of like though like you tell like the darker humor side of recovery, right? And you guys kind of play on it, and because a lot of us addicts and alcoholics like laugh at dark shit,
Yeah.
and that's the levity to the situation. But it's also that's the very real part of what happens, and it's just like I started with Chris, and then people know that although we're having fun here. There's a very real sense of recovery. Consequence
right.
from doing recovery or not doing it. You know what I mean?
That's true. And like the great thing, I mean, like Chris always said, toodles to end the show.
Mhm.
And I hated it.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
every
I hate that
episode
too.
he would say toodles, and I would say,
Yeah.
you don't have to say toodles. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And now at the end of at the first week that he died, I think everyone was wondering if I was going to say toodles,
Yeah.
which I wasn't going to do.
Yeah, no.
But I said fucking toodles for Chris,
Right.
And now I say that every fucking week since.
Nice.
And
nice.
so he's built in.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
every year we do a show on his birthday just about him, and every year we do a show on his death day, and we call his birthday Christmas because we miss Chris.
Nice.
And we also call it Dopey Day, and
Great.
it's like, it's a thing.
It's cool, man. That's great. And so, like, do you have a vision for the
Yes,
show.
I have
Okay.
a total vision.
Okay.
The vision is
You did say mention. I did hear you mention like a nonprofit that you're trying to get off the ground.
we're in the last stages of just establishing the 501c3, but we have a foundation called the Dopey Foundation, and basically its mission is to help, because people are constantly saying how the show helps people, and I'm like, no. We don't want the show to help anybody. We just want the show to be entertaining.
Right.
So the Dopey Foundation is going to help people, and we're sending out Narcan and fentanyl
Awesome.
testing,
Very cool.
and we've gotten like 30 or 40 people into rehab, into
Great.
treatment,
Awesome.
and we're trying to get more. And then we're also trying to set up like bereavement groups for people who've lost family or
Beautiful.
lost friends,
Beautiful.
and we're trying to set up like more addict to addict, help. Like
Yeah.
when people are scared of 12-step, like we want to offer something. Dopey
Sure.
Nation, the Facebook group, they do 26 Dopey Nation Zooms a week.
Amazing.
Every week, and they're free.
A group within a group, man. That's solid.
Yeah, it's cool.
That's really cool, dude. So, real quick, where can everybody find you?
Everywhere. You just
Everywhere.
Google Dopey Podcast. But I mean, the most important thing is
Yeah.
that I love it. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I love it. Like I love my family, and I still like working at Katz's, sort of
Right.
here and there. But I love Dopey. Like
Yeah.
it's like my kid. Like it's one of my kids, and it's my passion.
Mhm.
I'm in it 7 years, but I'm still really fired up about it.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
had DMC from Run DMC on last
That's,
week. Which
yeah.
I'm
I mean,
excited
you guys
about.
have had a laundry list of like great
We've had good people.
guests, but and then obviously, and it's not all celebrities, and it's the real like dark, funny part of recovery, and it's really really cool. So don't stop doing that. And I'm so happy that we were able to do this and sit down, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting to know you better and working with you.
Right on. Me too.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Very cool, man.
Cool.
All right, brother.
Right
Thank
on.
you.
No problem.